Hi, good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming and thank you for joining us live on Zoom. Today, we're going to talk about uh, North Bergen's Runaway Bride. I try to keep things thematic, and last month when Chelsea said, "What do you want to do?" And this was the first thing that crossed my mind. All right, a little unknown story from 1904 that is going to make not just national news, but global news. All right, and we have some great headlines that we're going to look at. But before we do that, let's take a look at like what actually is going on here. So we have this great piece that was put together. This is Miss Fromberg, who will eventually become Miss Julius Braun. This is going to be from an article she composed herself about 2 months after this infamous wedding event that takes place. So just to give you a little image of who she was and a little look at this great artwork that you don't really see too much anymore in magazines and newspapers. So let's talk about this forbidden love that was meant to be. All right, we have this great quote. Like I said, this was really well documented amongst local newspapers. It was spread out on the wire across the country, and there was a ton of people reaching out to her for interviews afterwards. Now, right now, you're probably wondering what she did and how this works out. This is all going to come together in a very dramatic plan that surprisingly worked. So she has this great quote, "I just had to do it. Mama and Papa were dead against my marrying Mr. Braun." Now, who are these people? Who are we talking about? So Mary Fromberg is a 17-year-old girl. She lives at 48 Main Street, which today is 1432 43rd Street. The building, unfortunately, is not there. It's a newer home that's there now, so the original home is gone. In her own words, Mary was locked up by my, let me just move this out of the way, by my stern and salacious parents to keep me from meeting and marrying the man of my choice. Now, again, it's 1904, or, not really necessarily arranged marriages are still things, but there was a lot more circumstances to who you could marry. She continued, "I was locked in a dungeon keep. Guards in the persons of my mother, father, relatives, and servants patrolled the walls." Now, again, remember, she's a 17-year-old girl writing this, so it might be a little dramatic, but let's get into the story. There we go. So who was her love? Her love was one Julius Braun, a 22-year-old ambulance driver from North Bergen. Now, both of these two were kind of popular amongst the younger demographics of town. A lot of the people looked at them as like these very attractive people, very popular. All right, so they were very well known in the young communities of North Bergen. Now, Mr. Braun was forbidden by Charles Fromberg, Mary's father, from even approaching the home. And he said, if you were to approach the Fromberg domicile, must be at his peril, right, in an interview. So Mr. Fromberg really did not approve of Mr. Braun. And those were 1904 fighting words right there. So Mary did a very responsible thing. She tried to discuss the idea of marrying Julius with her parents. And in her words, she was rushed into the attic boudoir and locked in. The Frombergs actually went back, talked to her, said, "Listen, you're too young, and Julius is too poor." The Frombergs were kind of like a well-to-do family in the town. They owned a fruit market in Union City, so they did have some financial superiority in the area. And Julius is an average kind of employee at an ambulance company. Now, despite the attempts to keep the two star-crossed lovers apart, these attempts would be futile as they were ready to be married. Now, here comes the plan, all right? This is a very unique plan, something I don't think you'd see today. So she said, "Mama and Papa were dead against me marrying Mr. Braun, and after I was locked in my room, I thought of 100 plans to escape." Now, there's several days she's just locked in her room and she's just trying to think of ways to escape and run away with Julius. She recalled in an interview that she basically just was in this room, racking her brain for hours on end. And then she started to think of like the romance novels of like the late 19th century. early 20th century. So, I mean, listen, a girl in North Bergen could be no different from any of these examples, right? Every girl in North Bergen dreams of somebody putting bedcloths together and helping her escape. A knight in shining armor rescuing, the fair maiden from the dragon and king, the cowboy saving the young girl and a runaway coach from the Wild West, right? And again, this is the examples she's going over. She talks about them in details in all the interviews she went through about how she was hoping Julius would be one of these things. So could these not apply to this young North Bergen girl? It all comes together one day when she's kind of just going through a newspaper and she reads one story. And this puts the ball in motion at this point. So she is going to read this story. And she says, the first thing that attracted my attention was an article about a woman who sprained her ankle while descending the stairs. Okay, the story was of a woman home alone, injured, and she basically hobbles to her phone, calls for help, and an ambulance comes and takes her away. Okay, so Mary thought to herself, what if I was injured? Julius would have to come then. So the idea is she's hooked on this idea, right? This is her goal now. What happens now is we are going to think she's going to think, she's like, how can I sprain my ankle? Maybe I'll break my arm, right? Maybe I'll pretend to sprain my ankle or brain my arm. And she says, I don't think I could do this. However, what she was more afraid of is getting to the hospital and then the doctors being like, you're faking it, you're a liar. But then she had this epiphany. She realized she never had to get to the hospital. She just had to get an ambulance to come and get her, okay? And have Julius in it. So here comes the unsung hero of this story, who is gonna get an earful from the Frombergs at the end of this. But Albert Myers comes along. Now, he's a mutual friend of Mary and Julius. He just happens to also be another ambulance driver. So Mary will admit to him that, maybe there's trying to get a little sympathy out of Albert, that she stood at the top of her stairs, thought about throwing herself down them, but just didn't have the courage to do it. So I think she's trying to hook Albert here. But instead, she's concocted this genius plan, all right? And he is going to play a monumental role. He is the whole thing holding this plan together. So what is the plan? Well, Mary finds an empty bottle in her medicine cabinet of something called carbolic acid. You will not find this in any store today. It was a poisonous chemical made out of tar, which people in 1904 used to clean their houses, okay? So it's basically Lysol today, what we would probably use in place of it. But she has this plan. The following morning, she tells her brother, I need to send for medicine. I'm not feeling well. In her letter that she's writing to the doctor, she writes the letter to Albert Meyer instead. And she explains her plan and asking Julius to have Julius prepared to come and escape. So Meyer receives the note. The plan is this. He's going to deliver medicine, which is actually just milk. And the way she knows that it's actually just milk is it's signed off by Dr. OK. All right. Again, these are some young kids with some big ideas. So it gets delivered. Now here comes this phase 2 of the plan, the false death. Okay. I want to live. Send for the ambulance. Okay, what is going to happen is Mary pours the milk into the carbolic acid bottle. Okay, she then disarranges her room, tears her shades down, and in her own words, works herself into a sort of suicidal hallucination. She throws herself on the couch, holding the bottle, and begins to shriek. Her mother and brother respond to her cries, and she says, I moaned, I groaned, slobbering as much as I could and yelling for all I was worth. Mary put on an act that most actresses today would probably be envious of, because they all buy it, okay? Mary is begging for help to take the poison away, bartering for her life as her helpless and unknowing mother looks on in despair. I want to live, send for the ambulance, she cries. And as the charade continues, Mrs. Fromberg runs around frantically looking for help. A memory which Mary then said she almost started laughing during her mother's panic. Mrs. Fromberg finally composes herself. She calls North Hudson Hospital. Now, Mary admitted later that as her mother was comforting her, she did start to feel guilt overwhelm her. Okay. And she said, I almost gave myself up. I almost said, I'm lying, I'm making this up. She said her mother promised me everything, and I began to feel pretty mean about my deception. That is until she heard the ambulance coming. And now, how do you hear an ambulance coming in 1904? The ambulances of that era were horse-drawn carriages. But as the driver was riding, he would be banging a giant gong to let people know they were coming. So she could hear this ambulance coming from a couple of blocks away. Now, here's the escape, okay? There's a great recreation of the image, right? They called it the rescue, right? There's Albert Meyer dragging the fake lifeless body of, Mary Fromberg down the stairs from her dungeon attic, as she calls it. Now, Albert Meyer rushes in the front door and this is a real emergency. And again, Albert's in on it, he knows the plan. Meyer picks him up, carries her out of the house, and Mrs. Fromberg is wants to go in the ambulance. And Mary said, listen, don't go, don't take my mom. We have to go right to this judge's house. And Myers just ignores the mom, just blatantly just walks right past her, jumps in the car or the carriage and just takes off. Right, leaving the mom completely alone with the brother. Now, Mary admitted that she was laughing during the ride as Meyer rattled the ambulance bells and he shouted at people on the boulevard and Berryline Avenue to get out of the road. Again, the ambulance is going to zig and zag through the streets of northern Hudson County. So we'll take a look first. So the ambulance is actually going to leave the Fromberg home and head up what was called New Durham Hill at the time. That's 43rd Street. So when you're coming up behind Town Hall, right, where everybody gets stuck at that great light, there. So Meyer is pretty smart what he does. He knows he's got to go to North Hudson Hospital, which is still in the same kind of location it's always been. It was a different building, obviously, back then. So instead of turning right, he's got to go down to 38th Street. He knows somebody might be behind him. So he takes a left. Right. And he knows Mary's not in any trouble, so he could put on this big show. He takes the left and goes towards 44th Street, right? Because that's the route you would have taken to the hospital. Once he goes down 44th Street, he gets to Berryline Avenue, realizes nobody's following him, takes a right and just shoots straight down Berryline Avenue, which sounds kind of crazy today because there's no way you could get from 44th Street to 38th Street fast on Berryline Avenue. There's 700 lights and 8 million people, but he gets down there and then they get to Judge Stooks' home on 38th Street. So if there's an escape, there's clearly going to be a wedding. Now, here we have the image, Judge Stoop, right, reading them their vows, and there's young Julius and Mary getting married. Now, Mary recalls, of course, Julius was waiting at Judge Stooks' house. He carried me in, wrapped in a blanket just for the look of things, for I was fully dressed and except for a hat, ready for my honeymoon trip, okay? And again, they said the wedding took under 5 minutes to do. So it was do you? Yes. Do you? Yes. Congratulations. And then they were on their way. Now, Mary is fully expecting her parents to be outside. She's like, there's no way they bought it. They have to know by now. She exits totally full of fright, but Julius has a carriage waiting for him. He's like, we're out of here. We're gone. They get in the carriage, they shoot not too far down to Park Avenue, and they get on a trolley. And the trolley is going to take them down to Hoboken, and they are going to head out on a beautiful honeymoon in probably the honeymoon destination of America, Sullivan County, Pennsylvania. Okay. The next day, the new Mr. and Mrs. Braun are just shocked when they get a newspaper and see their names on the headlines. Mary being the heroine of a national news story. Now, let's take a look at some of these headlines. So the first one, or let's go this, other girls are in just as bad as fix as I was in. And if they can get encouragement from my experience, they're welcome to it, right? That's a story later on that comes from a later article a couple months after. But the Evening Journal, which again is the Jersey Journal today, used an ambulance for their bridal coach, right? Ingenious ruse of lovers to outwit parents. Bride swallowed a fake poison. The New York Times picks it up. Love found the way in an ambulance, right? North Bergen couple united by pretend suicide. Girl deceived parents, behind ambulance went wooer, who then took the girl to justice of the peace, all forgiven. New York Tribune elopes in an ambulance. Girls pretend suicides to make marriage possible. The Democrat and Chronicle, which is up in Rochester, New York, right? Drinks poison to wed. Girl doesn't remain long in ambulance, however, but joins lover. The Baltimore Sun, right? Feigned suicide to elope. Girl hurried away in ambulance, goes to her wedding. The Chicago Inter-Ocean, okay? Girl uses ambulance for wedding coach. They say Hoboken maiden pretends to commit suicide to elude mother who kept her prisoner. Again, back in the day, if you've ever come to the postcard event we did, a lot of our area was called just Hoboken or Weehawken, because most of America would have never heard of North Bergen or West New York. So they used the two bigger locations. The Sun, also New York City, ambulance brings bride. North Bergen girl escapes from home to be married by faking suicide. News headline out from Emporia, Kansas. Again, feigned suicide to marry. Hospital ambulance furnishes girls means of escaping. All right, the obituary. St. Louis Post picks up the story. Ambulance was eloper's carriage. Locked in her room to prevent marriage, girl pretends to swallow acid. So again, if you notice, the further west we're getting, the more kind of elaborate and outrageous the story is getting, right? The Des Moines Register actually had like a really detailed account of this. Why the Des Moines Register took a lot of interest in this story is beyond me. But ambulance and wedding coach, determined girl foiled in elopement, fool's mother, okay? Makes pretense of suicide, found on floor of room in pretend agony, excuse me. Ambulance summoned to carry her away to hospital, lands her instead at home of minister. I said this made global news. The story got picked up in Australia, okay? Eloped by ambulance, girl simulates suicide to get a husband, okay? That's it, that's a little out there. The Omaha Bee, right, as everybody's a fan of this one, runs away to wed an ambulance. And again, this was like a really detailed article they had. This had a lot of great graphics that were put in there. So they were really interested. There's other reports. This was a big story in Indiana for some reason. It was all over the place. Again, it made its way up to Canada. It made its way into England. So global news story. The Pittsburgh Press, that's going to be where that original image comes from. That's kind of where they finally get a hold of Mary and get her side of the story. And she goes into a whole detail of her own thinking behind everything. Now, they had to come home. You know, like, you can't just run away to Pennsylvania and be like, all right, we live here now. They had to come home at one point. So when we returned, I was afraid my mother would never forgive me. But the Brauns returned to the Fromberg home several days. They enjoyed their honeymoon. Mary knocked on the door, and both her parents rushed to the door. They hugged her, they kissed her, along with giving the marriage their blessing. There was feasting and rejoicing that evening in the Fromberg home. The Frombergs welcomed Julius, even admitting they were glad their daughter married someone as bold as him. And for the next several weeks, Mary Braun, right, former Mary Fromberg, was contacted and interviewed by news outlets across the country to retell her story. They eventually kind of stay in the area. They moved down to Union City at one point, and they end up in Jersey City. And then, you know, it really is kind of a happy ending story for them. Weird way to get a happy ending, but it worked. That is all I have for you guys about the adventures of Mary Fromberg. Any questions for me? I'll take them. Yeah, Mary was a little before her time here, right? So I could only kind of follow them up until the 1940 census. After that, they may have just moved out of the area. I was unable to find like obituaries or anything like that. But from all accounts, they did pretty well. Wound up owning a house in Jersey City. So Julius turned his career around, I guess, a little bit. Stayed a delivery driver because that was referenced multiple times. But, you know, I'm not sure, you know, where they actually, how long they might have been married, but it seemed pretty good on paper, that is. 2 kids, both girls. So when you go into genealogy stuff, once they get married, you kind of lose them, especially not knowing who they might have married or anything like that. So unfortunately, I threw it out there to a couple of genealogy like forums just to see if I could get a final answer. I'm still waiting to hear back. A lot of people are just, now the internet has it. So there's like 8 million people thinking they know where everybody went. So I got to sift through all their responses, but we'll see. I'll hammer it down. No. It's kind of just this weird story. And I came across it by pure chance looking for something else a couple of years ago. It was kind of hard to ignore, this image, and the title here. This really catches your eye when you're doing some research. You're really not sure what it is, and the whole article attached to it again, and it kind of does a really good job telling the story. Mom finding her, her reading the newspaper, her with the poisonous bottle, the runaway coach. So went through it a couple of years ago and trying to find as much as I could on it. So this is the closest we could get. Again, 1904, it's kind of like iffy if they even would have had pictures taken of themselves. I mean, the whole marriage itself, we know there's definitely no wedding photographer there for that. So no, we never found anything on our end here, but I always say stuff exists somewhere, right? So who knows? Maybe marriage certificate, because I'm not family, I cannot access it from the state. They won't send it to me. They told me it's there, but they just won't send it to me. They said, you could come to Trenton. I said, yeah, I'll fit it in. Just quick drive to Trenton. Send me up. Question? Okay, so how did I find it? The headlines, that's a good question. There are a ton of resources to do research. The New Jersey room down in Jersey City, the library down there, they have access to the Jersey Journal, which archives all the way back to like 1870 up until like 2019. There's a great project the Library of Congress put together called Chronicling America, which their goal is really monumental. It's something, it's going to take them a long time to do, but they're trying to get every newspaper ever printed that's on microfilm or in libraries or wherever. They're trying to put it completely online. So they have access to a ton of stuff in there. And then there's, your pay sites, your newspapers.com and stuff like that. So there's a ton of archives available. Even if you just went on to, some of the free ones, Chronicling America, throw in your last name, see what comes up. You narrow it down by states, by years. So it's a really cool tool. I just fool around with it all the time. My wife is like, what are you doing? I'm like, don't worry. I'm hot on the trail of something that happened in 1827. She's like, okay, have fun. Oh, you know what? It's weird because, to be honest with you, at this time, in the park, there's a movie studio, right? There's the Ideal Movie House, which how could this not be a movie, right? But at the same time, we unfortunately lost a lot of silent films. Just throughout, there's actually 2 giant fires that happened. One here, when the Ideal Movie Studio burns down in the 50s. RCA owned it and never thought to move the films out because it was just a storehouse. So some kids went in, started a fire, whole thing was gone because the type of film they used was combustible. And then there was another huge fire in Los Angeles that stored a bunch of them. So we've lost a ton of films. I mean, there's a good chance. I mean, if I was a director in 1904 and heard this story, sure, why not? Let's throw it together, right? Let's see what happens. Who knows? Maybe somebody will make this film today. I don't know. Right? Yeah, of course. Sure. Okay, so why did the story catch such media attention? I mean, let's just think about this for a second. It's a 17-year-old girl, and again, 1904. Not to get too, social, I guess, but 1904, she's 17. She's expected to get married and have some kids, and that's it. Here you have this kid who comes up with this crazy plan Not just of like, oh, I'm gonna run away, but like, I'm gonna fake my own death to get married, right? So I think just the idea of like this kid coming up with this plan and then executing it and it working, right? I mean, I teach high school, right? That sometimes it's, I see some elaborate plans in my life, you know what I mean? Ask any teacher, they'll tell you about the plans that they see, if I just don't do any work. No, but like, all right. I mean, and you have kids, I'm assuming a lot of people have kids, they would know, hey, like, yeah, you've seen some elaborate, my mom is here. She's probably seen the most elaborate plans possible that probably failed miserably on my end, but kids do the craziest things, right? Sure. So what happens to Albert Meyer? What's the consequences? The worst consequence for Albert Meyer is he has to listen to Mr. and Mrs. Fromberg, because he's a nice guy from all reports. He actually comes clean and tells them the entire thing. He goes back, he makes sure they get to Hoboken, they're safe. Okay, great. He goes back and he's like, hey, Mary's fine. She got married though. And then, so Albert had got an earful. He worked for, what we do know, he worked for a company called Necker Ambulance, which was run by William Necker. And that was kind of the de facto ambulance service in Northern Hudson County. And then William Necker was also an undertaker. So Albert Meyer also, what's that? There you go, right? Yeah. So Meyer actually does work with him for practically forever. But Meyer, he just does his own thing. He's just a nice guy, get caught up in a crazy plan, I think. That's about it. Okay, so was the judge in on the plan? By all accounts, no. The judge kind of had no idea that this was going to happen. I think the judge knew he was marrying somebody, but no idea that it was, under the pretense of somebody faking a suicide. It's interesting because they don't get, the judge lives in Union City, or today lives in Union City. At the time, it would have been Union Township. And it's right near where Union Township City Hall was. However, they get married in his house. They don't even go to City Hall to do it. They go into this guy's house, which, by all accounts, there's no way of saying if that was kind of bizarre or if that was not the norm. Maybe it was the norm back then. I don't know. There's no evidence that says otherwise. So, I don't think he was in on it. He also seems like a no-nonsense guy, because there's also a lot of articles about Judge Stuke actually beating people up for coming into his court or coming into some trouble, and him just taking justice into his own hands, so to say. I don't know, it's the early 1900s, things were different then. But no, it doesn't seem like he was in on it at all. Sure. So the first, how did everybody find out about the story is the question. So the Jersey Journal, the Evening Journal, is going to be the first one to break the story. And I think once they report on anything, the Jersey Journal, the Evening Journal, the New York Times picks up on it, the Sun, which was a great big New York newspaper, the Tribune, which was another, they just pick up the story, right? Almost like today we see like the AP reports a story and it's on every news source. So I think once it gets picked up there, you kind of see like this trail, like, okay, reported from the New York Times, and that was in the Rochester one. Reported from, this, from the Chicago Tribune, and it's in here. Like, so it's almost like a game of telephone. And it's weird because the further west the story got, the more elaborate everything became. So it's almost like, okay, how do we spice this up a little more, right? How can we, well, what did they do in Indiana? Because there's like 8 newspapers that it came up for Indiana for some reason. And then by the time it gets to like St. Louis, Des Moines has this amazingly beautiful write-up on it, almost like a page write-up on the whole story, in details that the Jersey Journal doesn't even go into. And again, I was like, there's no way any of this is true, right? There's making up names. But luckily, because, armed with like genealogy websites, you go through and you go, oh no, these are all real people. Like this is the full story. So chances are, like, as this happens in August, So the news reports are into like September and October. So Mary most likely was doing interviews as well and giving the full story. So once one newspaper picked it up, everybody else starts picking it. All right. Yeah. October is the last time I could find anything out of that Pittsburgh or it's out of the Omaha Bee. That's the last time I came across anything. But again, who knows if she's picked up on anything that just hasn't been kind of archived yet. But really the story doesn't go past 1904, right? We really can't find any evidence of this still being like a major topic in the newspapers. So I think it was just kind of like get a good 4 or 5 month run and, you know, on to the next news story, so to say. Yeah, like, and again, this idea of getting permission to marry, I think in Mary's case, I think it was more the parents wanted someone financially maybe a little better off, maybe somebody in an industry the Frombergs were in. So I think that was kind of maybe their big hang up. You know, I thought it was maybe the age at first, but then, you know, you look at a lot of weddings and stuff from back then, and you do see a larger age gap than I think you would see today. But again, I think the whole hang up for the Frombergs wasn't necessarily that she was young. It's that they wanted her to marry someone maybe a little more wealthier, because that's brought up multiple times that Julius is poor. That's reported multiple times. Mr. Braun's poor. Like, it's like the last sentence of a couple of them. He's poor. Like, wow, man. Maybe he's got a great personality. I don't know, but he's poor. So, you know, it's interesting to see that that was a part of the story as well. All right. That's all I got. Thanks for coming. I appreciate it. Thank you. Yeah, it's definitely something different. It's definitely something you don't often see too much anymore. And as a father of 2 girls, I hope to never see that. Yeah, thanks for coming, everyone. I appreciate it.